Yeah, this is the shiur. Yeah, it's good. This is the shiur. Shiur is like this. We're studying the first midah.
Just push the buttons.
We're studying the first midah of that Rambam mentions here, which is in this book called Perakim, Perek Dalet. Remember, what is it called?
The first book in Perakim?
No, in Perek Dalet, the Rambam has a list. His purpose here is not really to give a list, but he does have a list. His list is like here b'derech agav, which, as we've discussed, I think, in the previous sheet, maybe in the other ones, in the Yiddish series. He's trying to tell you that the good actions and therefore good midas, good what he calls malas, are virtues, right? We call them virtues sometimes. But anyways, yeah. He says that, what's the problem? Verstehe du sagst. It's outside, don't worry. You should be worried, but it's fine. He said, he gives us a list of virtues, okay? And this first example is something what's translated here as zehirus. I don't know which translation you people are using. I'm gonna buy you a better translation. There's various translations. Okay, in Arabic it says al-afa or ifa. And in Harav Ibn Tiban's translation, it says zehirus. And now nobody knows what zehirus is. We have the sheet already about what zehirus is. Nobody, none of you know. We did?
Yeah, temperance?
Yeah, we did that. We told you that. And so now we're going to talk about this more. So this is the... Yeah, but do we remember how we got from one place to the other?
Which place to which other?
Okay, let's try to understand something very basic. Something very basic, okay? We're doing something like this. We're studying a book about virtues, okay? In Hebrew translated as midas toivos, midot tovot, which is a kind of weird translation, also a good translation if you're Aristotelian. But it's not of the essence of the virtues to be a measure, right? Middle means measures. Of course, if you believe that all virtues are measures in the sense of being intermediate, then it makes sense to call them midas, right? But it's not, they don't consist of being a virtue. It's the correctness, the correct measure of a certain kind of feeling, right? Attraction or aversion, basically, is what we call a good measure. And that's what midah. So really should be called something like tchunos toivos, like good axis, like Aristotle would call them, good attributes of the soul. Their goodness consists in them being the correct midah, right? That's also almost, the Rambam calls this thing that they really are is deus, right? Remember this sheet. That's why it's called hilchas deus, not hilchas midas. Because midas is just of something. And it's of what? Of deus. That's why it says in this first perek that you should have the deus in the correct amount. And that's what makes them good. Okay. But now we're discussing something called like this, right? Now what we wanted to get to discuss is, and we're going to begin a little bit for 5 minutes today because everyone's tired. We're going to begin to learn about these specific virtues and vices corresponding to them, obviously, right? The Rambam here has a very interesting list of 9 virtues, and the list is here to show you how each of them is an intermediate, how each of them is a middle between the too much and the too little, which are the bad, right? The bad versions of them, the vices that correspond to them. But I think that, and as Aristotle said, this is the correct way of learning, since, unlike what you people said, since ethics is a practical science consists of particulars, right? It's not about knowledge, it's about doing. And we never do universals. The only thing that does universals is the intellect. No, your intellect does universals. That's what it does. It universalizes. It knows universals. But your activity, your actions, or your feelings, or your habits, or your attractions are always towards some specific thing, right? Like a doctor doesn't heal sickness, heals a sick person. That's the primary example of a practical science, practical art, really. right? And since ethics is a practical art, we understand it on the analogy of a doctor, as Rambam said, nefesh, as we learned all the way back to Socrates, at least, that ethics is about healing of the soul, and probably even earlier than that. So we understand this. So since ethics is a practical art, it's not really as useful to talk about it in the abstract, in the sense, okay, all good virtues, or all good measures of feeling and wanting, or appetite, how we call it, is are intermediates. Okay, that's a very general form of all of them, but it doesn't help us very much. So therefore, we have to show this in the particular. We have to go through the list. And Aristotle says we're going to go through the list. He doesn't tell us where he gets his list from. Did you talk here about a list yet? A little bit? If you may remember, you should tell me.
Yeah.
And
so we have different versions of the list.
And there's different lists. And we got to show how each of these is an intermediate and understand each of them. So that would be the better way of understanding what a virtue is, and also how to have specific virtues. Nachon?
Also explain how to organize virtues, like hierarchically.
We discussed that, and we discussed that Rambam doesn't do that, or at least in this kind of virtues doesn't do that. He does have a certain hierarchy of virtues, which is, okay, we'll talk about this in a second. Okay, well, we're not talking about the hierarchy now. We're going to talk about individual ones. Okay, and we want to talk about an individual one called. So now we have this list. Now I want to talk a little bit from the perspective of an individual one, to try to understand what it is and see what kind of problems we get into when we talk about an individual one, when we talk about a virtue or a midativ. Okay, so let's try to understand, and we're going to explain this from the perspective of a sort of linguistic interpretive problem, right? And this is the problem. What is the problem? That if you read Rabbi Tivan's translation here, right, you see it says that there's a midah, I guess, called zehirus, right? A mala, that's the Rambam's way of calling them here, a mala, called zehirus, and it's between too much tava and not feeling pleasure. That's what it says. That's literally what it says. And this is showing you how this thing called zehirus, which you probably have known about before, now it gives you a better clarity about its definition or what it is and how to do it, which is that it's an intermediate midah, an intermediate virtue, or an intermediate attribute or perfection, which is in between these two things, both of which are bad, right? Okay. Now, what is the problem that I have here? The problem is that nobody knows what zehirus is. Does anyone know what it is? It's a word that Rabbi Shemonah ben Tiban gave us here, right? We don't either know what the Arabic word means.
In the Mishnah, it seems to indicate caution, no?
Does the Mishnah say anything about caution? So let's wait. So very good. So the word zehirus, it seems people think it means caution, okay, right? And obviously, like you said, it says some havizor b'mitzvah kala. Or what else does it say?
Doesn't it say zehirus?
It does.
Yeah.
Where?
Zehirus maybe whatever.
How many times does it say that? Precisely once? Is that the story? So what is the bigger problem that we have here? You could check.
Yeah, because I saved something that had Zohar in it relatively recently.
No, Zohar is a different word. It's from
Zohar.
shining.
No, something also in Masach.
Although you could make drushes confusing these two things, but it's different things. Okay. All these things mean. First, all the things are verbs, right? Something means something like be aware. Beware. Be careful. Similar things, right?
Protective or cautious way.
Be cautious. Okay. So this cautiousness is between having too much tava and too much pleasure and too little pleasure, basically. Liking pleasure too much and liking it too little. That's what it is?
No.
Doesn't make sense, right?
No, why doesn't it make sense?
It's not the traditional contextual definition of Zohar.
It would be between being too cautious and too little cautious. What's it got to do with pleasure? How do we get into this concept of pleasure specifically?
Why did we pick pleasure? That's what you're saying.
Well, we're talking about pleasure,
Why
obviously.
is zehirus the word to describe the moderation of the attenuation of pleasure to what's good for people?
We're not talking about being too much careful or little careful. We're talking specifically about pleasure.
Right, and over and under indulgence.
So Zohar b'mitzvah kala has nothing to do with that. So that's not a good proposal for even where Rabbi Yitivan got his word from, right?
Unless there's something taught by the definition in terms of the fact that you should be cautious about the influence.
You should be cautious about everything, but that's very not used.
No, zeh meaning it's something that
I think that's a third
something
shalish.
that
It's like
right, because that the hay is before.
there's no high.
Right.
I mean, it's yid zayin resh. It's not zayin high resh.
No, but
like that.
But it happens to be that Ashak has a lot of this thing.
Happens to be, yeah.
No,
But
Ibn Ezra says Yafli is Belushan Pele.
very nice, and also Nazir. The Rambam discusses the Nazir, but it doesn't seem to be.
There's an extended etymology, I think, where what he's describing as zahir is like zahir coming from caution in the sense that engaging in it too much or too little may have unintended consequences, or it may be something that can pull you in further than you intend, or you can overstep a boundary without.
Yeah, I get that, but we could sort of say that for everything, like kas.
So about
zehirus should be the intermediate of kas also, because be careful not to get too much kas or too little kas or something.
No, but is the way that you approach it idealized by caution, or is the like zahir to me also just seems to indicate not just a mean but also strategy.
Okay, but how is that?
I don't know if that strategy is equally appropriate to kas. That might
It's definitely appropriate to a bunch of other things.
How many?
I don't know, money. Not giving away too much or too little. You got to be careful with your money. People would say that.
Yeah, but is careful the strategy that do you achieve the attenuation of that virtue by being cautious?
Oh, we're not giving just to be clear, we're not giving
money.
I don't think strategy would be a good interpretation because none of these things are strategies.
I know. I'm saying is why he may have chosen zahir is because it contains a certain strategic element to it.
Okay, so maybe, but I think that there's always deeper problems here. Okay, so let's try to give you the deepest problem. That you're worried about this. Okay, very good. You already worried about this, so I'm going to try to make you not worried. What I mean to say is, there's obviously a bigger problem here. Okay, now what's the bigger problem? We've discussed this already, right? What translations are trying to do, at least Rabbi Ibn Tiba explicitly is doing a cultural translation besides for a literal translation, right? He wants to give us a word that means something in
our lexicon.
Yeah.
Really the
and the Reuven Shema lexicon, exactly. And he thinks that zehirus is something that is in the lexicon, but is sort of what this virtue means, right?
But that meaning is there a precedent? These words.
Okay. So there must be a precedent. But what is the problem? What is the issue that we have in finding such a precedent? The issue is more basic, right? And we're going to have this issue by every other one, I think, also. The issue is that there's little precedent. At least I could qualify this. But the issue is that it's hard to find the mitzvah of having good midas in the Torah, right?
Because
what's the primary issue?
It's usually speaking of this.
Because it's usually speaking of verbs. The Bible doesn't have nouns of things. It almost doesn't have nouns. It definitely doesn't have abstract nouns, right?
Yeah.
Abstract nouns is a rabbinic thing. It's a philosophical thing. This is why I already gave you this sheet. Why the Chachamim are philosophers, because they turn everything into forms, everything into abstract nouns, right? I showed you last week in Lamet Melachas, the Rambam doing that one step further. Then, right in the Mishnah it says Lamet Melachas HaChoyresh VeHazriya and so on, and the Rambam says HaCharish VeHazriya. For example, I don't know.
Last week,
this week. Maybe I learned it last week. Language. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that the Mishnah does all the time, right? takes things that say verb form and turns them into noun form. The noun of the verb, right? Now, this concept...
But the Mishnah actually doesn't do that.
Over here it doesn't. The Mishnah is still very, very, very verbal. Very much, a lot of verbs, but still does a lot of this, right? Now, you realize that what we're doing here, this whole concept of what it means to have a midah, as opposed to doing something, is finding the noun form of that verb, right? Because what it means to have a midah...
To belong to your nature.
Exactly. To have a nature, right? To have a kind of form or a kind of attribute, accident of a form, however you want to conceptualize it, something that exists in you, which is what we're really about, what is really about, which is what causes the actions, right? So, if you'll read the Torah, you will probably won't find even one, not only in the Torah, even in the... I was wondering about this, it's a good question. There might be, we have to find them. This is a question. Maybe some of the Mishnahs, Pirkovas are wondering about this question. In like Mishlei or Keheles or other like moral wisdom literature in the Bible, can we find the concept of a virtue in them? You understand what I mean? The concept, instead of saying you should be a good person and do many good things, saying you should have good midas. Right? You should have something that you have instead of something that you do, right?
Like tea.
Yeah. That would be one of the places to play around. But of course,
no, the Rambam actually says like those type of mitzvahs we don't count as mitzvahs.
Because he doesn't understand them as something that you should have. He understands it as telling you should do everything else.
No, because he thinks like they're like, for a lack of a better word, universals, right?
But no, not exactly. He doesn't say that it's called universal. You might interpret it that way. He says that because it's a hazahuda on the rest of the mitzvahs. That's the Rambam's language, right? It's a mussar. It's rhetoric about everything else, because the information, the content that it contains means do everything that it says. Kedushas mitzvahs. Rambam brings a medrash. It says kedushas mitzvahs. And there isn't anything to do besides for doing everything else. You might be right that this is something that what you become afterwards, but that's not precisely what the Rambam says in Sefer HaMitzvahs, at least. It might be true also, but it's not what he says over there. So this is the question: is there any command or any mitzvah, or even like I said, even in the wisdom literature, even in places where it's explicitly giving moralistic advice, is there anywhere where it talks about becoming a kind of person, owning certain attributes, right? Kinyonim we call them, right? Malkat in Arabic, things that you own. There might be, but of course we have a problem of language, right? We don't know how to read the Hebrew. Original Hebrew is something that we don't know, and therefore many people will go around saying, you could hear I'm sure you can hear a drusha of some other guy that notices this and says, yeah, because the Jewish way of thinking, the Hebrew way of thinking is to think in actions, because we're Heracliteans, we don't believe in any fixed forms. But that's probably nonsense. There isn't a real reason to think that. All older or more primitive languages speak in verb form mostly, and the Bible, as a representative of an older register in the language, is going to have to speak that way. It doesn't mean that they don't have those concepts. It just means that that's how they speak.
It says v'yirasem many times, but never how much.
But it says that it doesn't say you should have yiras shemaim. You see, we speak this way very naturally, right? Someone has yiras shemaim, and it never says you should have yiras shemaim. It says le'ira, to be afraid. It's a verb, right? Lira, not to have yira. Lira is lechoyela. Lira. It says lira is tchalelihim. He should beat you or God, which is also kind of verb. It means him doing something. But it never says you should have. You should have yira, or you should have a hava. We talk this very naturally. We talk this way, but it doesn't say. And the Chumash doesn't say. And the Tanakh, it doesn't say.
It describes people as virtuous.
There are very good. So what there is very good.
What is the difference?
What the difference
not
is?
Just in like how you talk.
The difference is talking about two different things. When we say you should have yira, we mean you as a person, as a kind of thing that is able to have certain midas, right? Certain something about you, which is what causes you to do things. It's very distinct from the action. The action causes this, and this causes the action, as we keep on discussing. But it's something distinct, right? If you could do good things without being a good person, so it'll slowly make you into a good person. But meanwhile, you're not, right? And you could be a good person without doing good things in a limited way, right?
It's not forthcoming from your nature.
Yeah. So there's a different thing. When we have this idea of being a perfect human being, which means having all the perfections that a human being has. Of course, having them means also doing them, but there's a having in it, right? We understand that just the word, like we even talk of a person as having a soul, right? You have something that makes you into the kind of thing that is a moral subject or a moral agent, right?
So you're saying
there's a kind of thing.
The Torah's language actually skips the main step.
No, it doesn't skip the main step, lamasa. It skips the sort of the result or the cause. It doesn't talk. It does have the way you get there.
No, it doesn't. Just as, let's say the yirat.
Yirat means to be afraid, not to be someone that has yirat.
No,
the opposite.
What is that?
What being afraid means? What these kind of feeling words in the Torah means is a different problem. But it doesn't have any. It doesn't ever say you should have yirat shemam. It says you should be a yirat shemam. Right? How do you become yirat shemam? That's another question.
But it's still
maybe by doing mitzvahs.
Even the cases where it is like anshe emes, right? That's
very good. So what we do have.
Very rare.
We do have but we do have things like that are adjectives, right? We do have things that are what kind of person you are. We do have that. Like even in Mishnah there's things like toiv leiv or chacham, right? Chacham is a person who has chachma, right? Tzaddik is a person who has tzedek, justice, right? It's not exactly a person who acts with justice. You become that kind of person, right? It becomes the adjective of the being, of the subject, of the substance, whatever it is to be a person. He is a tzaddik, right? He is a chacham. He is a ishchai, like you said.
Yeah, but it's not.
He is a toiv leiv.
It's not an adnoun. It's just a noun. It describes the person through the virtue, not as the virtue belonging to the person.
Exactly. It describes it's very much virtue ethics, though. It's very much about what kind of person you are, but it doesn't have the detail, right? What it doesn't have is speaking of a virtue, a specific virtue, at least as something that a person has. We don't say yesh lo tzidkes. We don't say he has the virtue of tzedek, or it's tzidkes, how we would say. We talk about some things like that. But it does say he is a tzaddik, as opposed to he does tzedek, right? A tzaddik is someone who does tzedek. At some point he becomes a tzaddik.
The midas of God are split a little bit, in the sense that it's
some of them are
right.
So I guess we don't have a specific verb, a specific adjective that says
virtue ethics as understood.
No, because well, some things we don't have words for them. Like how do we say what's Ha'izat Chesed Lalafim called?
Chesed.
No, that's Ha'izat Chesed. What's Lalafim? How do you add the Lalafim thing?
Chesed.
Okay. But there isn't a good word for that. That's what happens anyways, these kind of things. Like but Chanan is someone who does midav chinun or whatever that is, and so on. Yeah. Noisyavan might even be an adjective. But so we do have that, but we don't have the discussion of midas as a thing in itself. I don't think there is in the when they're not an adjective of the person, of the being that's being described, or maybe of God. I don't think we have that in the biblical language in Tanakh.
Ish something, right?
Like you said, ish milchama, all of these kind of things. Like we have these verbs connected to a subject. Right? Yeah. Things like that, but we don't have milchamtiyut as an object of analysis in itself. We don't have like lechima or gvura, right?
Any of the nisses.
Any of the?
Nis, like
do we?
What am I thinking of?
Yeah, zehirus.
Right.
Angriness,
Yeah,
happiness.
nis, exactly. Nis, yeah, I don't know what you were saying. Nisses, yeah, exactly. There isn't any nisses that I know of. Very good. Or very few. Maybe there are. Whenever I say these things, then I find that I was studying Amaratis and I just don't know the touch of a certain word. But
it's actually interesting that the nis is very similar to is. In other words, in Hebrew it would be chasidis. So.
Yeah, there's a problem because again, this could be language. Like in Hebrew, there's very few is. The word is doesn't exist in Hebrew, right?
She.
Like it is something.
What? She is that is, but just is. And in English, we like to put in the word is into everything. Being or is words like that. Who means he is. It's different. But in Hebrew, you just say. In English, we say things like. He is at home. In English, right? What's that is doing? He at home. If you talk to people that speak different languages, they always talk like this because English has this random ises for no reason. He is at home. Yeah, he at home. And in the Hebrew, you would say hu babayit. He in his house and at home. We don't say he who nimtza b'bayit. We could say in modern Hebrew you could add nimtza into every sentence. Who nimtza b'bayit. He is at home. It's a little too long for no reason. But in ancient Hebrew and even the Mishnah, there isn't this random is. So that's like an exaggeration of how much isness there is. Yeah.
You need to know the definition of is.
Yeah, but no, that is totally extra. It doesn't really do anything. But in any case, there's this thing. So, but what I'm saying, I think that there is an objective analysis. There is a level of understanding here that you don't get from simply reading the.
I mean, is helpful for abstract language because it gives you identification.
Right. It makes everything into an abstract sentence. Not everything is really like that. Like me being at home, I'm not being at home. I am at home. Like why do I have to have the being here? Like, what is it doing? But maybe English is such a philosophical language that it gets the level of being everywhere. I don't know. In any case, in the ancient languages that we read, there isn't. So what I'm trying to get at is, maybe this is a specific case of that, there also isn't midas. We don't have midas hakas. We have hakas and maybe even that. I don't know if there's in the Torah, but in noyach lichois and things like that, they're about attributes, they're about actions, but there isn't really there isn't the word midah, whatever work this word midas hakas is doing, which is something that you could have, right? He has a midas hakas. We don't have that language almost ever in the Tanakh that I know of. Not in this explicit way. Again, doesn't mean they didn't know about it.
Idealism that attracts investigation in terms of
maybe the language we could discuss. I'm not convinced that the language proves this. I'm just telling you, thinking at the level of language. A level of language which is hard to find, which is why you're going to be hard pressed to find the midah of being a Baal Tava, right? Or something like that in the Bible. Now, in the Lushei Chachamim, as I said, the rabbis are definitely philosophers. They definitely like finding things like that. But there's still a question if they have something like what we call virtues or midas. There's a question. I think the answer has to be yes, but most people don't know how to read it. So there is a question here, right? Do the rabbis have nisses? If I'm looking for this word for temperance, which is what I'm looking for, sôphrosunê in Greek, right? And the Greeks, right? The Greeks, at least from some point, at least from the times of Plato, maybe before, there's similar questions in Greek, have like lists of virtues, like the 4 cardinal virtues that Plato taught us in the Republic, right? Which are these 4 midas toivas, the 4 main midas: courage, temperance, wisdom, and justice. These are like 4 good things that people have to have, right? And also, of course, should be. A just person is called just, and so on. A temperate person is called temperate. Someone who has temperance is called temperate, but also we talk about them as objects of analysis in themselves, like what is temperance? We has this question, besides for just asking what is a temperate person. Of course, they're the same question, but we talk about this as something that the person has. This kind of language, it's not clear to me where you would find it. There's a question. You could maybe tell me the answer, but there's a question of how and where we would find it.
Abstraction is done with actions, though, in a certain way, like tzedakah ketzad kind of thing, like where we try to find at least ideal action.
Yeah, but for example, whatever the question is that leads us to the answer of a good midah is a intermediate.
Oh,
where would we find it?
We can find the trail of understanding. If we understand them, let's say Matan Tzedakah B'Seser is the most ideal, then we can understand the generosity. And
yeah, but they're not asking that question. You could understand a lot of things. I'm not saying that they're not here about being a good person. Nobody ever said that.
No,
what I'm saying is that we are not going to, if you're trying to make a list, like example, for we're doing something like this, right? If you're trying to make a list of what are the virtues, right? For example, McIntyre thinks that every culture has a different list of virtues that they care about. We sometimes work with that concept. Right? Now tell me the list of virtues that the Jews, that the Perakim cares about. Basically every Mishnah is another one of them. But do they have the word midatov or a virtue or a mala to work with? They obviously don't, because you see the Rambam has the right as Akdama to Perakim to give us these concepts, because you don't immediately get them from the Mishnah. That doesn't mean that the Mishnah doesn't have them, it just means that you don't get them immediately from the Mishnah. Right? That's why we're reading this Akdama to Perakim, which the Rambam says you're not going to understand Mishnah unless you have these abstract concepts in your head to put the Mishnah into, right? So this is a problem. So this is really the real reason. When I start talking about zehirus, for example, and you say, well, I find something called zohir. To be zohir, zohir is a verb. You don't find much zehirus in the Mishnah as a thing to be, right? As a thing that you could have or be. even a Adam Zahir would be a title for that person, the adjective for the kind of person who has the midas zehirus. I don't even know how much we have of that. There might be places where there is that word in the Mishnah or in the Lashon Chachamim. So you have my problem.
Mm-hmm.
This is a problem. Now, how do I resolve this problem? So, how do I resolve this problem? So I do think, two things. I do think that there are, in the Chachamim we definitely do find titles like this, right? And even more of them. Like in the Torah we might find 5. You could be a tzaddik, a chacham, or I don't know, toiv leiv, or anshe chayil, maybe 5 things like that. Like we have like anshe chayil, yirei elihim, anshe emes, but okay, that's a nice list of virtues, right? Virtues for a judge, of course, or something like that, or a leader. That's a nice list of virtues. Not a very long list, but it's a list. In the Chachamim, we're going to find even more virtues. But the Chachamim very not systematic about this, of course. Maybe they shouldn't be. And we're going to have a very hard time of connecting those virtues, connecting those kinds of people that they describe to the words that we have. And people like the Rambam who inherit lists of virtues from the Arab Muslim philosophers, who inherit them from the Greeks, and try to connect them to different things. You're going to have a hard time identifying them, right? But we are going to find certain things. So what we're going to be trying to do is try to find certain things, certain kinds of people, or certain virtues or habits or things that people have that the Chum talk about that are distinct from the pasuk, right? The pasuk doesn't explicitly talk about things like that, or at least not in those words, or maybe even the pasuk will talk about them in a verb way, and then the Chachamim would give them a noun and try to connect it to this. So I can give you now a few pieces of information, okay? And it's almost 11 o'clock, so I'm not going to go too long about this. 2 pieces of information I want to give you about this. One piece of information, firstly, 2 pieces of information from the side of the Chachamim, okay? So Harav Tzadik Rabbeini Shmili ben Tibon used this word zehirus. Now the word zehirus, I think, comes from, you know the people over it comes from, right? No, zehirus, okay? Talking about a midah of zehirus, because we have to remember that Havizor is not going to help us. It's going to help us in a minute, but meanwhile we have to find a word. What? No. There is a very famous brayso from Zehiurs that's quoted in a few, maybe more than once in the Talmud Bavli, and it says, the Zehiurs says, zehirus mevila zehirus, and so on, right? Now that Mishnah is very explicitly, we did a sheet about this, I don't remember, there was a sheet in Yiddish about this, that this Mishnah is very explicitly a ladder of virtues, right? There's a whole oimek in this, but there's Mishnah, some kind of ladder of virtues, and it's also very explicit, maybe the most explicit. Rambam quoted this in this brayso in the beginning of Perakim to prove his way of thinking. This is one of the really important Mishnahs that shows you that Zehiurs at least did think of human progress in terms of becoming a better and better kind of person until you ultimately become the perfect kind of person, which is a. Remember what the perfect kind of person is called, right? No, what's the best kind of person?
Nothing.
Chassid is only the second to last best kind of person. The best kind of person is called a Navi. Exactly. Maybe you could do Tchias. That's the best kind of person, right? So the Zehiurs held like me and the Rambam that the Baal Recha Kodesh is just the best kind of person. Nothing to do with God. Not nothing to do, but not some magic thing that God pops into your head. That's what he said. Mevi l'day means there's a natural causality here going on, right? A causality of growing, some kind of growing, which we could discuss in a different time exactly how to describe it. Some kind of being this kind of person allows you to become, or maybe even makes you become, at the next stage, the better, even better kind of person, right? And it brings you very explicitly doesn't say Adam Zohir, Nase, Adam Zoris, and so on, which would be the standard way of people to talk in the Chachamim. He explicitly talks about midas, right? Explicitly talks about attributes that this person would have. It gives this level of analysis exactly. It talks about zehirus, bringing to zehirus, bringing to anova, and yirat chet, and all kinds of words like that, right? And Chacham obviously have a lot of words like Anova, Yiras, Chet, Chasidus, Tahara, Kedusha, all these kind of words, specifically talking about the Midas. Right? So that's number one. Now, the Prince Bayur, what did he mean when he said zehirus is a very important question. Right? Okay? This is one piece of information. Okay? Second piece of information is a new word called, very interesting. There's a word called, in the Chachamim, new word that doesn't say in the Torah. Okay? What's the new word? The Torah says you should be a yirat lehim. Okay? You should be fear God. Very nice. It has already in Parshas in Sefer Bereshis about Avimelech, right? Even a goy has to be a yirat lehim, right? Amarti rak in yiras lehim b'makom hazeh.
You're right.
Avram told Avimelech that there's no yiras lehim in this place, and therefore they're going to kill him and take away his wife. So yiras lehim is kind of person almost already in that pasuk, whatever exactly it means. Okay.
But it's not a yare.
No, exactly. It's yiras lehim. The opposite. Avram Avinu talks about this midah called yiras elihim.
Okay.
He definitely does give you a noun. There is not yiras shamayim, yiras elihim in this place. He doesn't say that. Well, of course, he's talking about the people not being yiras elihim, but he does talk about it in this language, right? In the holy sages, there's a new word called new thing, yiras chet. Did you ever hear of it? You think that means being afraid of chatoim? Why would they're not scary? They're geshmak. Why would you be afraid of them? But there's such a new word. Being a yirat chet or yiras chet, anybody yirat
Caution as
chet.
an approach.
I don't know, but maybe.
That's what it seems to be, right?
I'm not sure. I don't really like this word.
Chet or
I don't really like this word caution, but I'll see about this in a second.
No, I mean caution, reservation, or at least
Okay, awareness.
suspicion around
Awareness.
Awareness. Good word.
Awareness is a better word. Beware. It sounds better anyways for now.
Why is yiras be weird?
Wait, I didn't say. I don't know. He said.
Whatever, be weird. I mean,
I don't know. There's such a kind of person called the yirat. Okay, not manyan. Why would he be? What would it mean? What would it mean to be a yirat anyways?
He's wary.
Like one thing it means is that there's such a kind of person, right? This is what I'm trying to get at. There's a beside that doesn't say in the Torah. Let's say it like this. You have to be yiras elihim. Everyone understands. You got to be afraid of God. Maybe it means in action. Maybe it means also just to be afraid and feeling or something like that. You understand the point of that, right? But yiras chet, like where would they get this idea from? Why would anyone be yiras chet? Like you're not allowed to do chatoim. Very nice. You're not allowed to do them. I get that. Steht in the Torah and chatoim. Shouldn't be doing that. But why would I be afraid of them? What's the point of that? There's no chiyuv. Ask a Litvak. Where's the chiyuv to be a rechet?
No, I think it describes a certain understanding of how the nature of certain physical activities that.
What it describes is precisely something that we call a midah as distinct from an action, right? Saying you should not just be a person that doesn't do chatum, you should be the kind of person that doesn't do chatum. Now, how do we express that? As we keep on explaining, midah just means a love or a hate. Yirat means you hate chet, right? You have an aversion to it. The word fear, I think, is kind of a misnomer. It doesn't mean being afraid in the sense of like the chet is going to eat you. It means, like I said, being aware of or having an aversion from, hating. Okay, sophrosyne chet would be maybe a better. But
that's why I think yirat describes a certain kind of.
I think that
you fire, right? When you're
cautious.
Exactly. Caution, yirat doesn't always mean fear. It could mean caution or something like that. But
that's
when
also
I say
describing an approach.
Yes, it's
right?
describing an internal thing, not an external, not an action, but an internal state of the person, something that a person has or is. Yes, I don't like the word wariness because I want to explain you why. When you say wariness, you talk about like a general. I'm going to get to this in a second.
No, not right.
Like a general attitude of being like a guy with
suspicious.
nervousness.
No, not suspicious.
What I'm talking about is someone that doesn't like to sin. Understand? Like the Rambam's exact definition of the difference between someone who has the malice and midas and someone who just does the correct things. Someone who does the correct things, he likes to sin, he just doesn't sin. Like the EFC guy, the FG b'basechaz guy. Yirat is precisely not a FG b'chet guy, right? He's afraid of chet, so he's not a FG b'chet, right? That's the difference between yirat and loy choite. Loy choite is just a tzaddik. Yirei chet is something different than a tzaddik, something that doesn't like sinning, right? He's against it by himself. So here we have something I think very clearly, a concept of someone who is against sinning internally. Okay? Now, the question here, we have to get to, now there's another question, okay?
The adjective is not, that you also call someone a Yirei Shemayim, right?
Yes, the Yirei Shemayim is not the same thing as Yirei chet.
Right.
Totally different.
What I'm saying is, but what the commonality between them is that they both come with a sense of caution.
Yeah, but Yirei Shemayim is not cautious of the Shemayim, right? It means something different. The word Yirei means something different in those two sentences, in those two...
Yeah, but it means it's different consequentially, but not...
No, it's a different feeling. It doesn't mean the same thing. Okay. You gotta stop believing words.
No, I
all
don't.
Of you.
I don't. I just think
it's an idiom. It's an idiom. A Yirei chet is not the same thing as a Yirei Shemayim.
No, today's
no,
of
course
the same
not.
thing. The Yiddish Shemayim has an aversion to Shemayim.
Yeah, I guess you could have that, but that's not what it means. I think. I mean, Yiras Alehim, maybe it does. But we could think about this. But Pashtus, it doesn't mean that. Although Kim Leira, whatever, we have to talk about this. But Yirei chet explicitly is talking about chet. It's saying he's against chet. It's not saying Yirei Shemayim is not against the Shemayim. It's something slightly different than that, at least. But all I'm getting from this Yiras chet word is that there's something being against chet. We're getting into something called chet. Now, I want to go further with this, but I want to give you another piece of information. Okay, so that's two pieces of information. Now, you'll notice that the Holy Rambam, whenever it says in the Mishnah Yirei chet, he translates it as al-ifa. The same word that we translate as zehirus, the Rambam translates for Yiras chet. And the rabbinic in Perakim, where the Rambam gave another version of the list of virtues, says zehirus k'loima Yiras chet. Okay? Shtida. Did I ever tell you this already? Yiras chet is the Rambam's the Rambam understood like me. We're still missing a step. But the Rambam understood that Yiras chet is whatever the same thing called sophrosyne in Greek, okay, or ifa in Arabic. And that's how we translate it. And this makes sense, like I just showed you. At least it makes sense that Yiras chet is not being afraid of sinning because you're afraid of God or something like that. It means having an aversion to sin, an internal aversion to sin. Now, which sins? I think we're missing that part, but at least we get this. Okay, so that's two pieces of information. We have these two words, zehirus, which probably means something similar. At least Reb Shmuel ben Tiba and maybe people before that understood that. It's not the verb of be weir. It's a kind of attribute of being something relative to something, being weir relative to some things. We'll talk about in a minute what, and same thing, the word Yiras chet. There's other words I think also we could make connected with this. And a third word is, I could give you a third word that the Rambam gave. Another third piece of information. In Perakim and Mishnah Perakim, it says there's Tamid Avram Avini and Tamid Bila Marasha. What did the Avram Avini have? Which mid did the Tamid Avram Avini have? They have a different kind of soul, right? The Tamid Bilim have a nefesh rechava. What's the difference between a nefesh shefalah and nefesh rechava? Says the Rambam, nefesh shefalah is zehirus or alifa. Todavar. Another word for the same thing. Okay, so we already have three words in the Mishnah for this virtue. And again, this, by the way, that Mishnah of nefesh shefalah is again a very explicit Mishnah talking about a kind of soul, right? It's not saying Talmid Avram Avini don't do certain things. It's saying that they have the kind of soul that is more limited, right? Nefesh shefalah doesn't mean low. More limited. No, I'm not worried.
It sounds very much like worried and not worried. Rechava is like, yo!
No, that's not what it means. Rechava means baltava. He wants a lot. And the Talmid Avram Avini want less. They're not worried. They're more limited. They have a certain self-control, you could say, or self-limiting. It's not about being worried. The word worry is a very bad word that doesn't come into this whole conversation. They're self-limited, they're restrained, they're temperate. Those are good translations. But it's a kind of soul that is smaller, right? And that's the image that the Mishnah uses, nefesh shefalah. I think I even had more words for the same thing, but I forgot right now. Those are three words at least. Now, I have to tell you something very interesting, okay? Now, there is another piece of information that we could have.
The Rambam in the Yad calls it Tahira.
So the Rambam, that's what I meant. In Sefer Yad, in Mishnah Torah, in Hilchos Dayis, Perek Aleph, the Rambam has more words for this thing.
Right.
Tahira Gif, he calls, no, that's the Beyoser. The intermediate, he calls. and this is another.
He says something.
Very good. He says, yes, shubal taiva, leisiz banafsh melech b'taiva, yes, no, sorry. Shubal lev toir or gift toir admoit, I think that's the translation the version that I have. Yeah. But nefesh rechov, the Rambam uses for something else over here, so it's a little more complicated. Okay,
That's what I'm asking.
for money.
What does he?
He skips nefesh and guf over here. The Rambam calls this baltava. And the ketzonis, but the middle, what's the middle one? It says that there should be the baroness, and it says lo yisave ledvarim shagif tzrich lem. Oh, there's problems here. I'm not going to be able to get to this. Ich weiß the mans. But he doesn't talk about the middah toiva. He only talks about the bad middah. You have to remember, in Perakim Aleph, you don't get names for the middah baroness of anything. You only get names for
the bad. So that's
very good. But the good and the bad are the too much. The too much. That's too much. Baltava.
Oh, he just calls it baltava.
Yeah.
Doesn't he call?
No, he calls it baltava. Letis banafsh melech b'tava. Yeah. He has nefesh rechov over there also, but he interprets that relative as part of the money, not regarding not mefaza, wanting too much money. Mefaza, not giving away enough money. Giving away too much money. Two different things. So there's some more regarding that third Mishnah that I told you, nefesh shefalah. There seems to be a different interpretation in Hilchos Dayas, so we have to think of. My piece of information, my other piece of the puzzle that I wanted to give you is something like this. So you have noticed that this zehirus thing is somewhat weird. Why is it somewhat weird? Because it doesn't seem to mean what I'm trying to get it to mean, right? Zehirus means awareness. What does awareness got to do with? Now, it's very clear to anyone that reads this Perakim, this definition here, even the whole Perakim, that the midah of zehirus is specifically about physical pleasures. Okay, basically food and sex. If you know of another physical pleasure, you could tell me and we'll think about it. But that's the one that they talk about most of the time. And doesn't seem to be a good translation for any of these words, right? Some people translate precious. Okay, this is another word that in the Chachamim, precious. Okay, by the way, I have a third word, sneeze. I have another long list of words that we have to think of here. So, what I want to say is like this. I want to tell you a piece of information. That the Yevunim, they believed in this list of virtues that we discussed. Now, one of their virtues is called, like I said, Sôphrosunê. Sôphrosunê is translated in English or from Latin as temperance, or that's one of the translations that gets handed down to us. There's other translations also. Now, Dua Machloikes, maybe not a Machloikes, maybe more like a development. Was Dua Machloikes was detached from the midah. What is this midah? So it seems like originally this midah, Hanikra Sôphrosunê, meant something very broad. Plato has a dialogue called the Charmides, and in this dialogue it talks about some man that claimed to have this midah, and he goes through 4 or 5 different definitions of them, and basically none of them have anything to do with physical pleasures. They're all about being a mensch, all kinds of very, very broad things. Like he says, having the correct modesty. That's one word, one thing that he has. It's about, he says about not running very quickly in the street. One of those like funny definitions that he gives. And then Zachary says, what do you mean? What's wrong with going quickly? Why you have to go slowly? But some kind of Yiddish sagt man Eitelkeit, right? Angezumtkeit. Trying to get it. Not at all. I'm trying to get. There's all these and then he says maybe it means minding your own business, so like not being a nefesh rechova. Maybe it means being self-controlled in all ways. He goes through all these definitions. Maybe it means knowing yourself, knowing your place. Because he goes through all these definitions for the word Sôphrosunê. That is one shtickle Plato. So it seems over there, and he says, like everyone says, that you're the most Sophron. Du bist the größte Baal Midah in the ganze Welt, but you don't know what it is, so it can't be. This Zachary standard way of drawing people like up. In any case, it seems like, and if you could look at earlier sources and so on, it seems like I've originally meant something very broad. Okay? Something in this area of like being self-controlled, of being that we say idle, of being, this idlekeit is one of the words. By the way, I gave a sheet here, no, there wasn't enough sheetim over here about this whole subject, but there was a sheet once about how there's certain virtues that they only exist in English, like courtesy, that nobody knows how to say courtesy in Yiddish. But there's also midas that's only Yiddish, like idlekeit. You know how to say idle in English? There isn't the word. Timid? No. Timid is one we discussed. Like one of the things that his Karmades tried to say was that maybe timidness is basically is Sôphrosunê. But something like refined, people say. It's rachamasses. Idle is not refined, same as refined. So kitzer, listen, since you can idle go, it can't be idle as a god. No, nobody knows. Refined only works for people that know what idle is and they say refined. But go try to write it on Reddit. I'm refined. He's refined. To give information by Shidduch. He's a refined guy. What in the world does it mean? He likes fine art. He appreciates fancy cars, not just like the fat cars.
I think refined is just people use it as a synonym.
No, they don't know that it means that. You could say refined and it makes sense in your head that that's a translation of idle. No, idle is not well mannered.
No, maybe the
idle is not what refined is.
Maybe the
that's not the same thing.
A different type of refined.
Okay.
The go is refined.
So I get very good, exactly. So the word, maybe the correct translation is refined, but you don't understand what I'm talking about. You have to see he's an idle guy. You know what it means, okay? It's one of the, I forgot on my list of shidduchim. I read about, I've noticed about this recently. I said that there's a list of malas that you have by shidduchim, but this is also one of them. Idle. This is it's interesting midah that we believe in it for both genders. Anyways, but get back to my point. Sôphrosunê in Greek originally means something very general, and then Plato, in his very famous Republic, says even after he does his very famous division of the virtues by the 4 parts of the soul, 3 parts of the soul. Remember there's 3 parts of the soul called the appetitive part, the tave, and thumos, anger or inspiration, spirit, and intellect. And then, of course, intellect has the virtue of wisdom, spirit has the virtue of courage, and then many people say, I'm not sure, I think there's 2 ways of reading this really, but people you often say, or maybe later people for sure say that that appetite has the virtue of temperance, but Plato explicitly says that temperance is not properly a virtue of appetite. Appetite doesn't have virtues. Aristotle might be disagreeing with this. We have to get into this. No, it's the virtue of it's a political virtue. Temperance means that the appetitive part has the correct relation, is submissive to the spirited part and to the intellect.
But isn't that what all the virtues are?
No, not all of them. This one. No, wisdom is just wisdom. It's just knowing.
No, wisdom isn't, but
no, and spirit is having courage. There's nothing to do. Courage is having courage. That's what it is. This is the only one that's like this. Justice is having everything in proportion, which is different. Not being one thing.
I think that meant regulation by the intellect.
No, the only thing that means regulation by the intellect is Sôphrosunê, and according to the Republic, precisely.
And all of its descendant virtues.
All of this.
I mean, all the virtues that would follow from.
Not everything. Nothing follows from this. This is a virtue. This is like one of the big virtues, and this is what it is. So it's still very, very general in the sense of not. It doesn't. Like you can even say this. It doesn't really belong to the appetite part. It doesn't belong to your will, or not to your will. Sorry, to your appetite, to your desire. It belongs. It's that the desire listens to the mind or to the spirit even. That's what it is. So it's a very general thing. It's something like we call in the interestingly, has an image of courage, an image of war. Right? We have this idea of this has to do with
its governance.
Yeah, this has to do with we discussed this already once. It has to do with Plato's idea that the way to fight with your appetite is by fighting, by having courage, by having spirit.
Aristotle's disagreement with this.
Aristotle doesn't really have this idea, no. Aristotle thinks you could train. See, Aristotle thinks for something different.
Big machlokes.
Exactly. Aristotle doesn't believe in Melchem. Right. Plato's the Republic, at least, is always stuck in the Melchem Hayetzer still. Plato himself has other accounts, but the Republic account is the Melchem Hayetzer account, right? You have your appetite wants one thing, and you're going to sort of subdue it or by the spirit guided by the intellect.
Which allows room for akresia and these sorts of problems.
Yeah, that's what it's meant for. It's meant for learning that and solving that. That's why he has 3 souls explicitly. Aristotle doesn't believe in that, And Aristotle thinks that you could train the appetite itself. You could train the non-rational parts. Remember, Aristotle said, I don't really believe in the three-part soul. I believe in a two-part soul, which the irrational part and irrational part, but there's two kinds of irrational part. One is totally irrational, like the nutritive part, and the other one is semi-rational because it can be taught, right? It can be habituated, and that's what Midas are about. So
what you're habituating is semi-rational.
Yes. Because it
Never
can be taught.
Down to the appetite of love.
No, there's no point. That of course
so
not.
Agree that
not the appetite.
Nothing's ever a virtue of the appetite.
No, when what Aristotle calls appetite and what Plato calls appetite is not the nutritive part. Nobody's talking about that.
Right.
It's the will, the desire, not will, desire. So according to the Heilige Plato, then still, because of his view of how the things work, like we explained for a second now, but still, this Sôphrosunê zehirus is what people think zehirus is. Some kind of self-control, right? Being in control or being limiting yourself or things in that.
It's not like aversion or...
No, not aversion. That's what I'm saying. It's not aversion. It's because there isn't a training of the appetite. There is controlling your appetite by your mind or by your shame, even by your sense of shame, by all kinds of different... There's a lot of ways of controlling your appetite. By your shame, by courage, by other things. But it's having it under control, having it, how do we call it? Regulated, or I had a better word, I forgot. That's what it is. That's what would be something like zehirus in the broader sense that people think. Rabbinic Aristotle, who the Rambam follows, doesn't hold like this. Rabbinic Aristotle thinks that, like we just said, that you can train your app. You could be a yirat, you could actually hate bad things and not like things that are not really good for you and so on, right? And that's what moral training, ethical training is about. Plato also believes this, but let's not get into the story. But and that therefore he also does something because of this and for other reasons that we have already discussed a little bit. His virtues are a lot more finely split up than Plato's, right? Aristotle has a list of 9, 10, 11, 12, nobody knows how to count virtues, doesn't believe in the 4 cardinal virtues, because those 4 cardinal virtues are based on this model of the 3 plus 4, or however you want to divide the soul. Aristotle thinks we should not divide virtues by the soul, we should divide virtues by their object of desire, since all virtues are about desire or about social relations. So the virtues for Aristotle consist in that relation or in that desire and the power of the soul or in the part of the soul, in the way in which you desire that. But it's always going to be divided by the object of it, not by the part of the soul. And therefore, Aristotle says that what we call sophrosyne should be restricted greatly. And it doesn't mean just being self-controlled. He has a virtue, doesn't even entirely have a virtue of self-control, because remember, self-control is when you don't have a virtue, right? When you're kratic, not acratic, but kratos, in control. And Aristotle thinks being in control is only on the way to virtues. When you have virtues, you're not in control. You're entirely fully controlled. You could say something like that, but it's not what it consists of. It consists of the training of this. Yeah. So he says that at zehirus, Sôphrosunê is explicitly about liking the right things, and specifically not only liking the right things in the area of physical pleasure. That's all it's about. That's his restriction, great restriction of Sôphrosunê to a very specific part of moral life, very specific part of life. And to understand exactly how he decides it, we have to talk about separately. But in any case, the Rambam is following this interpretation of the word. That's why for the Rambam, zehirus means precisely zehirus, relative. That's why he reads it as yiras chet. Now you understand that when he says chet, he doesn't mean sin in the sense of like sleep with your wife, but not when she's in Ida, because that's just chet. What it means is the attraction to chet, right? Like, and this is true for Chazal. When Chazal talk about litom utam chet, they mean the pleasure of it. They don't mean the sinning of it, like being over and against the law of it. Chet doesn't mean going against the law in this context. In the context of yiras chet, usually means someone who is self-controlled. He controls his yetzer, he controls his desire for physical pleasures, mostly for sexual pleasures in Chazal. Chet in general in Chazal means sexual sins. So, and this is why the Rambam's restricted reading of zehirus as yiras chet. And unlike, like for example, Ramchal is a Platonist in this sense, and for him zehirus means just generally being aware and self-control. But for the Rambam, that's not what it means, because the Rambam follows Aristotle, and the same halacha that happens for Sôphrosunê, for the Greek word, which is zehirus, happens for the Jewish term zehirus, which is more or less a translation of that. I have more words like tznius, b'shes panam, that all seem to mean similar things, but pick out different aspects of this virtue, and we have to see them in the Rambam also. I'll talk about that at a different time, and everyone should have a good Nacht and shine.